Hello there, my pretties. It's the Queen of Lions, and welcome to episode 119 on Shadows and Pretties. So, today in this episode, I am going to be talking about a horror movie. Most of you guys know what this one is. If you know who Freddy Krueger is, then you should already know on who he is and what this movie is. So, this is actually one of the classic horror movies of a horror movie genre I've seen, and that is Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, the first one came out in 1984, so yeah. If you were, growing up in the 90s or something, you might have already know who Freddy Krueger is and even know who terrorizes people. So, it does follow by with a couple of sequels, which I will not going to go through every single sequel, but I will kind of, give a little bit of a brief summary of what happens in the other movies. So, with that being said, I'm going to explain what is Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, Nightmare on Elm Street is a supernatural slasher horror film that has, a franchise. And I honestly really liked how this story went out. As I really like that Robert Englund, England or something, I apologize if I don't pronounce him correctly, played as Freddy Krueger. Now, this was a very popular horror movie in the 80s. Like, this one came out in well, 1984 on November 9th, and it grossed out worldwide. So there is a remake of this movie, of the first Nightmare on Elm Street, that came out in 2010. I will talk about a little bit about the differences between that one and the others. So, I think with that being said, I think I should go ahead and, get started on the plot, shall we? Now, Wes Craven made the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. So, I really have to say, Wes Craven did a lot of crazy shit in the past. Nightmare on Elm Street is no better. So, anyways, for those who haven't watched Nightmare on Elm Street for, haven't seen Nightmare on Elm Street in a while, and for those who haven't seen it or anything, if you guys don't want spoilers, please click off the video. But if you want to stick around and, hear the plot and all that, be my guest. So, this takes place in March of 1981, where Tina Gray wakes up from a nightmare where she gets attacked by a man known as Freddy Krueger, who apparently wears bladed fixed gloves in a boiler room. So her mother points out four mysterious slashes on her nightgown. So the following morning, she was consoled by her best friend named Nancy Thompson and Nancy's boyfriend Glenn. So the two stay at Tina's house when Tina's mother goes out of town. Their sleepover gets interrupted by Tina's boyfriend, Rod Lane. When Tina falls asleep, she dreams about being chased by Freddy Krueger, and Rod is awoken by Tina's thrashing and sees her being dragged, fatally slashed by unseen force, forcing him to flee as Nancy and Glenn wake up to find that Tina was bloodied and dead. So, later on, the next day, Rod gets arrested by Nancy's father, Don Thompson. Despite his pleas of innocence at the school, Nancy falls asleep in class and then dreams that the man has chased her to the boiler room where she is cornered. Then she deliberately burns her arm on the pipe, and the burn startles her awake in class, and she notices a burn mark on her arm. So Nancy goes to Rod with the police station, who tells the details of what happened to Tina with his own recent nightmares. So this makes Nancy believe that the man who is responsible for Tina's death, and so at home Nancy falls asleep in the bathtub, but she gets nearly drowned. But Nancy depends on the caffeine to stay awake, just so she invites Glenn over to watch her as she sleeps. So in the room, Nancy sees the man prepared to kill Rod in his cell, but he then turns his attention towards her. So Nancy wakes up and runs off. Now, the man gets killed by Rod wrapping the bed sheets around his neck and killing him, and making it look like he took his own life. So, parents become worried and describes their dreams, and her mother, Marge, takes her into sleep disorders clinic, where in a dream, Nancy grabs a man's fedora by the name of Freddy Krueger, or Fred Krueger, written on it, and pulls it out of the dream into reality. So upon barricading the house, Marge reveals to Nikki that Krueger was an insane child murderer who was released on technically when he was burned alive by parents on the street seeking gain justice. Nancy then realizes that Krueger was now a vengeful ghost and is killing her and her friends out for revenge. So Nancy then tries to call Glenn to warn him, but his father prevents her from speaking to him. But Glenn eventually falls asleep and gets killed by Krueger. So Nancy has to put Marge to sleep and asks Dawn on who is and who is across the street investigating Glenn's death. So they break in the house in 20 minutes, and Nancy rigs the booby traps around the house, grabs Krueger out of the dream, and then pulls him into the real world. The booby traps affect Krueger enough that Nancy can get a light on him and on fire and lock him in the basement. Nancy then rushes to the door for help, but when the police arrive to find out that Krueger has escaped from the basement, and Nancy and Dawn go upstairs to find Krueger smothering, Marge in her room. But Dawn puts out the fire, and Krueger and Marge vanish into thin air, and when Dawn leaves the room, Krueger rises from the bed behind Nancy. So Nancy realizes that Krueger has powered his victims' fear, and that she calmly turns back to him. So Krueger evaporates when he attempts to lunge at her, but Nancy steps outside in the bright, foggy morning where all of her friends and her mother were still alive. Nancy gets into Glenn's convertible and go to school when suddenly comes down and locks them in as the car drives uncontrollably down the street. So 3 girls were dressed in white dresses playing jump rope when they heard chanting Krueger's nursery rhyme, and Marge is grabbed by, Krueger through the front window, and that's how the movie ends. So that's basically the end of, Nightmare on Elm Street, the first movie. But I really have to say that I really do like how the cast of the characters went out. Like, I do like the, fact that, Robert Englund was Freddy Krueger in this movie. I like the cast of, the movie. I mean, all the cast did like a really great job. Of course, sometime this was being made sometime in the early 1980s, so I think 83 and 82, they started, beginning to film it. But the writers, Wes Craven, began to make a screenplay for Nightmare on Elm Street sometime in 1981 after he finished the production of The Swamp Thing, which I have never heard of that movie yet or even took a look at it. So, of course, they were some actors that were originally going to be, done for Freddy Krueger. Like, for example, David Warner was originally going to play Freddy. Makeup tests were done, but he had to drop out due to the scheduling conflicts. Replacing him was difficult. Kane Hodder, who would have been later further known playing the slasher icon, character named Jason Voorhees. Yeah, Jason Voorhees from Nightmare on Elm Street. So, of course, they ended up making, some other for concepts to try to, see which character would fit correctly. They eventually got Robert Englund to take the role and go from there. I mean, all the characters were very well done and they were developed. So, of course, the filming for it started in 1984. Now, I know I said, not the filming, but the principal photography began around that time for the total of 32 days. I mean, the screenplay and all that was built before then, and the plot for the movie was made before that time. Now, I'm sorry if I didn't really pronounce pretty good, conflicts of, or I don't know. I haven't watched the movie in like a while. Now, it's been released on VHS sometime in the 90s, and even been released on DVD, and etc. So, yeah, if I say things that were inaccurate with the whole Nightmare on Elm Street thing, I do apologize. I really do apologize, because, I haven't seen the movie in a while. Now, there is Nightmare on Elm Street 2, which is a sequel to it, called Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now, that movie came out in 1985, the year after, the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Which, I mean, it takes place 5 years after Nightmare on Elm Street, where it has, the Welshes moved into, Nancy Thompson's former home, and her teenage son Jesse has a nightmare about being stalked by Krueger. I mean, the deaths are in these Nightmare on Elm Street movies are like gruesome, but they're also fantastic of its own self. Like, I mean, it's pretty well done and made. Like, it's not just thrown in there for the sake of throwing in there or anything like that. It's pretty well done. Now, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, or Dream Warriors, came out in 1987, so that takes place a year after the events of, well, the second movie, but this movie came out a few years later. And since I'm not going to go through every single movie of Nightmare on Elm Street, because I want to just basically state this, that, I really haven't watched the other sequels yet, but I just kind of, point out some of them. Like Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, that one came out sometime in 1988. So, and apparently this takes place a year after Dream Warriors, followed by the fifth one called The Dream Child, which that one came out in 1989. So that takes place a year after the previous film yet again. However, though we actually find out more that, well, since Alice is graduating from high school and, there's more stuff going on. I mean, I really do think that these sequels actually worked pretty well with Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, some may disagree with me, but I still find this one to be, rather amazing in that. So, the final Nightmare, which is the final movie for the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, that was before the remake came out. This one came out in 1991, so I'm sure if you guys have watched the Nightmare on Elm Street movies when you were, well, in your teen years or something, like I was in my teen years when I started watching the first movie, and I didn't find the first movie to be too bad, honestly. I didn't really find this to be too bad, honestly. Now there's other Nightmare on Elm Street movies. So, and it was originally intended to be the final installment of the series, such as Wes Craven's New Nightmare. However, that was released years later, but it takes place outside the series canon. And a crossover sequel, we have Freddy vs. Jason. That one was released in 2003. And, of course, we also have the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street that came out in 2010. So, I mean, the other Nightmare on Elm Street movies were not really directed by Wes Craven, but I know Wes Craven directed the original movie, but he also didn't even bother to, sit there and direct the other ones, but did the screenplay for the third movie. I will give it that. It did a screenplay for that movie, but, the other movies he didn't really work too well. Like, when he works well, he doesn't really, contribute any directory or anything like that. I mean, he did, somewhat did some work, but it didn't really, add up that much. So, I think I'm going to go ahead and explain the difference of the remake of it that came out in 2010. So, the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street was a more messed up of its own self. Like, I mean, despite that, this is actually a remake of the original movie that was directed by Samuel Bayer, but it was not by Wes Craven or anything like that. I mean, it's based on that, but still, I mean, it's kind of basically almost the same plot as the original movie. Like, the remake of it is basically pretty much the same, except they add more messed up material, such as, well, Freddy Krueger being, a preschool groundskeeper, being a child predator. And I mean, I could definitely go on forever on why he's been doing that and all that. And it's really messed up. So, the development sometimes started around 2008, and it processed as the years go by, and with how they want to, make it more messed up like the original. I mean, this one has a lot more messed up content than the other movie does. So basically the plot is the same thing, but except it's more messed up of its own self. I mean, Jackie Harrell Haley did Freddy Krueger, the one from 2000 the not the original Freddy Krueger, but the one from the remake, I have to say I didn't mind the remake. I only seen bits of it, but I wasn't really that big of a fan of that to be honest. I mean, it did somewhat have a potential of being, good. I mean, it's an interesting concept, but I wasn't really a fan of the fact that they kind of went over extreme almost, adding some more messed up, shocking content in it, which I'm not gonna really go into too much detail on that because, yeah, it's not ad friendly, I would have to say. But I'm gonna sit here and say this: like, I have not seen the whole movie of the remake yet, so I can't really give out my thoughts and opinions on it. When I see the other Nightmare on Elm Street movies, I might give out my thoughts and opinions on it in the future. But yet again, I don't really know. Just wanted to mainly, review the first one. So there's definitely that. I mean, that's just me here or there making my own opinions on it. Now, if you like this movie, I can respect your opinion. If you like the original, that's fine. If you don't like it and you like the sequels, if you like the remake, whatever movie you prefer to like, we're all entitled to our own opinions. So, I mean, the original one was pretty good. I haven't seen the sequels in like a while, actually. I think it's been like a couple years since I've last sat there and watched them. Yet again, I mostly remember watching the first movie. And about the remake, I have not seen the remake of it yet, so I don't really know too much about it from what I read. So, what did you guys think about this story? Not story, the movie Nightmare on Elm Street. Do you like the original? Do you like the sequels? Do you like the remake? Did you not like any of them or all of them? Whatever you prefer, feel free to leave me know what your thoughts are on Nightmare on Elm Street in the comments below. As I'm the Queen of Lions, thank you so much for watching today's episode. If you're new to my channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. Don't forget to ring the notification bell when I upload so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, I'll see you all in the next video. Peace out.